So I'm really pleased to be here exhibiting at the Pittenweem Arts Festival, where I'm invited artist this year. And this is my show, Migrations, which is the collection of work that I've put together over a year, travelling through Europe, through the UK and as far as the Middle East, drawing together strands of my interests in human migration, bird migration, and the ecology and climate change issues that I'm interested in tying together through that. So about 4 years ago, I was watching on television when the summer boats unfolded on our television screens, and I saw people crossing the Mediterranean in real distress, and newscasters on remote islands watching people and commentating on this. And I realised that people were taking the same lines of flight as the birds that I've been sketching and studying on their migrations over the past 30 years in my own artistic practice as a wildlife artist. And I found that really compelling, not least because there were commentators at the same time referring to these people in kind of bestial terms as swarms, plagues, rats, cockroaches. And I felt a real urge to try and respond to that artistically. The response I've had has been really affirming. I've had people who've been really connected to the work, and I've really got it. I've got that parallel between the bird migrations that I've used as the imagery and the metaphor, and the real human distress of the people who have ended up in these desperate lines of flight. So a lot of the paintings that I've produced here are sketchbook pages. They're A3 watercolor sheets that I've completed out in the field, sometimes on one spot. And very often a bit of a picture done in one place and then amalgamated with another sketch or painting done somewhere else. And these pages are then ripped out of the sketchbook and framed, and you can see a lot of them here behind me. I was doing a series of art classes in one of the refugee schools out in the desert in Jordan. And I was teaching colour mixing and just doing art activities with a number of the kids there, ages from sort of 6 to 14. And on one of the days I went in, one of the boys came in and was really proud because he'd brought his own art materials. He had a pencil case that had all his colouring in pencils. And he wanted to use that in the project we were doing. But the hasp on the case had broken. Now I had several pencil cases that I had brought with me for my own sketching, and I just gave him one of those to put his art materials in, and I swapped it for his broken case. And that was the box I used for my art materials as I travelled around over the next couple of weeks. And then when I got home, a few weeks later, I started doing paintings back in the studio, and one of those, I took the old pencil case he'd given me and incorporated into the painting, and worked into that some of the images that I'd been playing with from my trip around Jordan, but also little sketches of the windchats that had been inhabiting the dusty scrub at the back of the school. When I was travelling around in the transit points and camps and sketching and talking to people, I'd often just pick up little bits of material that was lying around, just ticket stubs, discarded bits of paper, food wrapping, tattered bits of clothing. And I began to get the idea of how I might try and incorporate that into some of the paintings, to add texture, to a kind of collage effect in the pictures. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was to try and push the work that I was doing really quite far away from my usual practice. And back in the studio, I started incorporating bits of this material into the texture and the kind of fabric of the painting. And really one of the reasons I wanted to travel to these places was to kind of touch the texture of what it felt like to actually be there. So seeing things on television was very compelling, but I had this urge to kind of touch the ground on where this was happening and get a feeling, like a physical feeling of what it was like to be there. And that, I guess, is what I was trying to do in a number of these paintings. And there are a few pictures which I produced which are kind of constructed boxes. And very often these are layered with this collage. But some of the work is actually on bits of wood and material that I've picked up. There's one painting called Refuge of Thorns, which is a painting of a migratory redstart. And it is painted on a piece of burned wood that I picked up from the camp in Calais. And when I was there, camp was being destroyed. It was being ripped down by JCBs and diggers, and what was left of the camp was physically on fire. And so there were huge areas which were just charred ash and burned bits of wood. And while I was watching, there were a number of redstarts just flitting through the edge of the camp, through the bushes. And these birds are black and grey and red, and there was something about that little flame of red in the bushes, this bird moving around, that echoed the flickering flames in the ashes of the camp. And that's how that particular painting came together. I've had a lot of responses from people at this exhibition asking if I found the whole experience upsetting. And while that's true, there are times when I found what I was hearing from refugees and what I was seeing of people in real distress very upsetting. My overall experience from this project has been hugely inspirational and incredibly positive. And that's largely been because of the people themselves that I spoke to. These refugees who've overcome enormous obstacles and somehow kept their sense of humanity and their positivity in circumstances that I would have found absolutely crushing. But also people I spoke to who had gone to volunteer or who worked as charity workers and had perhaps gone somewhere to try and help for a few days and then had ended up staying and had effectively given up their careers and their home lives to just try and help. And what I found in these people was admirable and inspiring. There were times when I was standing in places thinking, I'm really not very happy here. This is very uncomfortable. So in the course of the year I was caught up in a riot in Calais. I got mugged in Sicily. I got escorted off ports and out of the edges of camps by armed police and armed guards. And there were many times when I felt uncomfortable. And some of that, I think, actually kind of jarred in my work and made it quite different from what I would usually do. I'm best known as a wildlife artist, and that's my creative practice. I go and I paint animals. And there's a degree to which I'm absolutely aware that that's kind of what I'm doing with this work, in that I'm going and looking at and observing people. And it's quite uncomfortable because these are people in real distress. But right the way through the project, I found that was too upsetting. It was too upsetting to portray particular people and particular places and their particular experiences. And quite often people would tell me a story, their story of what had happened to them and how they had come to be where they were. And it would be heartbreaking. And that combination of finding all the circumstances so uncomfortable and the stories so compelling, I found that instead of portraying people and their stories, I was depicting the incidental things which I saw around me as I travelled. The fences, the camps, the texture and detail of places. And also, because I'm a bird watcher, because I'm fascinated by birds, I painted the birds that I saw. And in a way I told the stories of the people through depicting the birds. I found the mechanism of sketching really interesting in this process as well. So when I'm painting birds, I will sit down, I'll watch, I'll think, and I'll sketch what's in front of me. And when I went to transit camps and spoke to people, I would just sit down in some quiet corner and start drawing and painting and sketching. And I very, very consciously didn't take a kind of lens camera with me. I had a few mobile phones in my pocket that I would occasionally take snaps off with people who I was speaking with and who were quite comfortable taking photographs with me. But I knew that using a camera that pointed at people would change the dynamic incredibly. So I didn't want to do that. But I found when I was sat on the ground sketching, people would come up to me and engage and ask what I was doing. And it looked so strange, and the physical act of sitting down made me kind of unintrusive on their lives, and kind of dependent on others to engage with me, because I was sat still. And I would find people would often come up the next day or a couple of days later to chat. I did different art classes and art activities in the different places that I was working. So in Cali, I tagged along with a couple of charities and did art activities with some of the unaccompanied children in the camp. And this had a purpose. It was to break down those barriers that these kids had who were really very wary of any authority figure, including people working with the charities. So having these activities, their guard came down, they were engaged, they would talk, and it was an opportunity for the charity workers to check if they had, warm clothes or appropriate shoes, or if they needed medical help. When I was in Jordan, I taught art classes in one of the refugee schools, and I got some direction there from the teachers that what they wanted was some sort of creative engagement, an opportunity for kids whose lives had been massively disrupted to the extent that they hadn't had a chance for proper schooling or any kind of creative engagement, and that this could be some opportunity for them to connect and see that creative processes could be part of their lives. And particularly for the girls in a very patriarchal society, they could be shown that perhaps they could have a creative life that meant something to them. And I also did activities and art and craft tables for mosques and welcoming groups and settlement groups and charities in the UK. And the purpose of that mostly was just to keep the kids busy while the adults could talk. But also in many of these kind of community centres, it was an opportunity to create works of art with a view to putting them up on display with the kids' names in places that they would come back to, and they had a physical stake and presence in that community and in that place. The topics I'm working with are really hard issues that can't be easily fixed, around topics of climate change and refugee issues. But I think it's important that we do try and look for solutions where we can, and to try and approach that with a sense of humanity and compassion. And in a sense, that's what I'm trying to do in this work.